After graduating from college in 1983, I sold everything I owned, except for a small box, and headed to Europe. And I traveled first to England and hitchhiked up to Newcastle and took a boat over to Norway and traveled around in Norway where I had some family and visited there. And then I was going to hitch down into Europe. Kind of the first day, one of the drivers offered me a job at a farm where his girlfriend worked. So I went over to his family that night and got to meet his family. And the next day I was introduced to the farm family and ended up spending about 2 months there working on this farm. Then I went down into Europe. The farmer was able to arrange a truck to take me at least as far into southern Germany as possible, and that worked out really well. And then I had an uncle in Switzerland I visited, and then I went to the last couple days of the Sarajevo Winter Olympics in 1984 by then, and that was a lot of fun. Then continuing to hitchhike, I traveled down through Greece. Then I decided I wanted to go to Asia. I had not originally intended to do that. And in Europe, I had traveled on the cheap. I had hitchhiked, generally, except for the truck drive I got through for parts of the trip, and slept in hedges, slept out in the woods, the side of the outbuildings, sometimes inside buildings. My first day in Yugoslavia, for example, which was all the cold air dynamics, I ended up sleeping in a like a farmer's shed. I thought it was kind of unique because I didn't quite know the political situation in Yugoslavia at the time. It was kind of odd. But anyway, and this whole trip, for over a year, I only spent $3,000, $2,000 in expenses and $1,000 in flights. So I did it quite cheaply. But when I went to Asia, I stayed in these little simple hotels. They have their little rooms and such, and it was cheaper to travel. So I flew to Nepal and spent a month there and trekked around in the Annapurna area, and then down into India, where I had all kinds of experiences, and then to Sri Lanka. And I found this kind of travel to be, or these countries to be very difficult at that time. And I've been to India a number of times since then, and it's nicer now, but it was very difficult to travel in the Indian subcontinent, I felt. There were even getting clean water was tough. I'd take crystal iodine and shave off a piece and use that to purify water, so I was always drinking warm plastic and iodine flavored water. It was just, there was a lot of poverty, of course, and as there is even now, but seeing things like leprosy and sort of the intensity of the poverty was really eye-opening and helpful in that regard. And by that point, though, I was taking buses and trains because it was really quite inexpensive. And going from Delhi to Mumbai, or Bombay at that time, I fell asleep briefly on the train. It was an overnight train, and my backpack was thrown overboard, and somebody else had the same incident occur too at some slow spot, and so I lost everything. And I actually tried to recover it, which is a long story, but ended up with nothing but the shirt on my back and just a few other things, my passport and my traveler's checks and that sort of thing I had retained. And for the rest of the trip, I traveled with this little tiny duffel bag, which had I had a flute and some shorts, and I had another shirt made, and that was really it. A toothbrush. I don't even think I had a comb. It was very, very light travel pack, so it made it very easy to get about. And in fact, I used that same small amount of items even later when I went back to Europe. But in any event, went down to Sri Lanka for about 6 weeks, and then back up into India. And southern India was especially unique, I felt, because there really weren't many travelers there, and it was a very interesting environment to work in. So there was sort of the dark side of this travel in a way. There were some people there that were interested more deeply in drugs and alcohol than they were in meeting people and seeing the wonderful sights, which is what motivated me, was this sort of to satiate this wanderlust and to meet people from all over the world. But there was, my first experience with that was in Pokhara, Nepal, where I met a couple of fellows that had been in Pokhara for 2 weeks just drinking, and I thought that was an amazing thing. And of course, you had that in Goa as well, in southern India, and some other places too. So that was kind of the bad thing, but that was the exception. I didn't really meet that many Westerners during my travels in the Indian subcontinent. I intended to go back overland. Well, I actually intended to go to Southeast Asia, but I went to a harbor in Sri Lanka, a big harbor, and tried to see if I could get a job on a boat to cross the Bay of Bengal, but I couldn't find anything. So I then was going to go overland back to Europe, but there were political problems between India and Pakistan. Even though I had secured a visa for Iran, and that would have been interesting, but that didn't work out. So I flew with Aeroflot back to Oslo, Norway, and then traveled in Norway a bit, and then down to Sweden where I worked again. They were harvesting oats, so I worked there for a little while, and then traveled around in Europe. I bought a bicycle, and from some people I met actually in Nepal, and rode a bike up through from Germany into Luxembourg and down to France and to Switzerland, where I was going to meet up with some other people I had met in Asia. In fact, that couple were a Swiss Romance, French-speaking Swiss people, and we traveled together for 4 weeks in Sri Lanka, and they didn't speak any English, and so I learned French, at least enough French to develop a friendship with them, which was really kind of funny. So I'd write down French words, and it's interesting how loneliness can motivate linguistic abilities too, I guess. So anyway, I went to visit them. I rode my bike all the way down there, and they weren't there. So anyway, this is all pre-email and pre-internet and all these sort of things. And it was all post restante, and communications was sparse. So anyway, I tried to sell my boat in or my bike in Switzerland. I could not do that. Nobody in Switzerland wanted to buy a used bike. So very cheaply I was able to take it up to, by train, up to Paris, and I sold it pretty quickly there. I put a sign up, and au vent, and I forgot what the price was, but anyway, I sat outside the George Pompidou Center and and sold it pretty quickly. And then I went back to the U.S. briefly, and then worked down in Venezuela for a while, and then came back to Europe, but I had a little more money, so I visited my family in Norway and friends in Sweden, and used Interrail to go by train, and I used youth hostels. So I traveled in better style through Europe, and that was 1985, and then I came back to the U.S. to get a real job.